Lord morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Nice to see everybody out today. I feel a little discombobulated here. All right, good to see everybody out this morning. I know everybody's excited. We had the first significant snowfall of the year. That's always great, right? Now it's getting ruined by all the rain. Sorry. All right, well, let's go ahead and go to prayer before we start Sunday school lesson this morning. Anybody anywhere? All right, Steve. Ruby?
Remember my family, remember Gary, he fell a couple days ago and hurt his shoulder, so he's home today. Remember Chris and Michelle and Phyllis, Chris's grandmother, Chris's half brother died. We're going to have a memorial service for him next Saturday, but it's been devastating to all of them, so just remember my family.
All right. Anybody else?
Mark, I'd
Go ahead, Carol.
like for the church to remember my family, of course, but remember Amanda. She is supposed to be coming in for church, but she's been on an emotional roller coaster for about 6 weeks, and she's going to leave this afternoon and go to North Carolina and spend some time with my family there. So you all pray for her.
Ronnie?
Continue to remember me and my family. Remember my two brothers. Remember my mother. Continue to remember my uncle. He's still in hospice. Continue to remember him and his family.
All right. John?
Mark will let you guys remember Bruce this morning. He's not feeling well, and remember my parents as well.
Okay. All right, Ruby?
Remember Kimberly, Linda's daughter, her mother-in-law died, Loretta Turns. Remember Kimberly, she's sick too, and just remember Dave Deeds and a lot of people out sick, Eileen and Sue and different ones. It's not able, I'm sure, would like to be in church with them.
All right. All right, I'm sure everyone has unspoken prayer requests. Let's all stand if you would, please. Let's try to remember each other's requests this morning. And as always, let's remember to invite God into our service. Ronnie, do you mind leading this morning, please?
Dear most precious
Heavenly Father, thank you for your word this day. Give us this privilege and opportunity. This blessing. This one of us to come here and praise the Lord, to worship our Lord, your Son. Father, we just ask you to be with us this morning. Especially this morning. Amen. All right, before we start, I'll also ask if anyone has read a verse or passage of scripture you want to share with the rest of us this morning. All right. Do you guys believe we're going to be reading the exact same text we've read the last 2 weeks again? No, we're not. Don't believe it. We have moved on. The title of our lesson this morning is Wiping the Slate Clean. Obviously, we're still in Genesis. We're going to be taking a pretty familiar story that I think everybody's familiar with. We're going to be taking pieces of it and kind of talking about at least what I took away from this. You ever hear anybody or have anybody ask you if you could go back to high school and do it all over again, would you? No, wait a minute. I want to see the no's and I want to see the yeses. Where's the no's? Where's the yeses? You'd like to go back and do it all over again? All right. The reality is, whether we want to or not, we don't get do-overs, do we? There are no do-overs in life. You know, my son Hayden, he likes to play video games. Anybody play video games? I'll bet I do some. His favorites are the Super Mario Brothers stuff, you know, Mario, Luigi, and Yoshi and all those. He loves those, and there's a lot of those games. You know, in video games, there's a really cool thing. No matter how bad you play, no matter how many mistakes you make, no matter how many times you die, what happens? You get to start all over again, right? You get more lives, you can reset the game, you can whatever, or it's like game over, all right, you want to start again, you want to continue. You can just do, and you can do this again and again and again and again. And now, there are no losers, really, when you think about video games, right? Because you can always come back and do it again. Some people just catch on quicker than others, but really there's no losers in video games. Is that the way life works?
Absolutely not.
If you look around, though, and you see the way people live, and sometimes that includes us, let's don't be too judgmental here. People live their lives just like they're in a video game, don't they? They're going to go forever, they're never going to die, and if something bad happens, they get to start all over again, right? You see this all the time. Now, I put a couple of examples while I was doing my notes for the lesson, things that just kind of came to my mind. When you think about this, that type of mentality of living your life like you can just reset at any time. Think about, and it's so predominant in our world today, drug and alcohol abuse, right? And as if the abuse isn't bad enough, abusing these substances isn't bad enough, because they can kill you, and you only get killed once, right? There's all the things that kind of stem from that, those abuses. Think about impaired driving, confrontations, and you see it all the time, stealing, violence, all of this stuff that sort of accompanies that kind of lifestyle that you see a whole lot. But that's not the only way we do that. Now, obviously, that's kind of an extreme. I like to show, here's worst case scenario, this is what happens. But even our day-to-day lives, we sort of act like that. I can do whatever I choose, I can do whatever I like, and you know what, if something bad happens, they're gonna hit the reset button, right? Anybody in here know any aggressive drivers? Anybody in here a little lead-footed? No, not that. You you ever watch that person? My brother David was one of them. Now, he's gone now. This is not what killed him. It's a wonder. He was one of those guys that seemed like he was always vying for pole position in a NASCAR race. You get out from that section where you leave the plaza and you're going toward Crossroads Mall, section of Route 19 where you got 4 lanes and then a center turn lane. Always doing the bob and weave to try to get that next car ahead and passing this way and that way. None of y'all in here can do that, right? Except for Allison, apparently. I have a feeling there's a few more in here that do just that.
Depends.
Do you ever think about what might happen? Make a mistake? Probably not. What about these folks that enjoy extreme sports? Anybody into any extreme sports? We like to watch them sometimes. The snowboarding and the parachuting, the base jumping and all this stuff. It's the adrenaline rush is more important to these people than what the possible consequences might be. Because guess what? One mistake, there's no do-overs. That's it. That's the end of everything. You don't, oh, okay, I burned that life, I get another one because I'm in this big video game called life. It doesn't work that way, does it? Now, I'm sure that we could keep going and name all kinds of different examples to kind of drive this point home about there's no reset in life, right? We get one. You always hear people, we get to go around this planet one time and that's it. So, do we play this kind of Russian roulette spiritually also? You betcha. When we can, and again, a couple of examples, when we continue to dally around with the same sin over and over, aren't we making taking a horrible risk by not addressing that, putting it behind us? What about presuming upon the grace of God and living however we want? Do we do that sometimes? We just, well, God will forgive me for that. What about when we make a conscious decision that I'm going to disobey or do something that I know God doesn't want me to do? Isn't that kind of the same thing? Aren't we taking a risk with our lives, in this case, our spiritual life, our souls? Aren't we taking a risk by doing these things? And yet people continue to live, whether it's these first things that I talked about, things here on earth, or spiritually, where we play that kind of game as if we're in one big video game and I can always do it again. If this goes bad, I can always just hit the reset button, drop another 50 cents in the machine, whatever it is, and I can go all over again. If we should find ourselves in any of these circumstances, when we draw our last breath, we're going to find out really quick there is no reset button. If we get to that stage and we haven't addressed these issues, especially us as Christians with these spiritual things, I'm not talking about the driving too fast, Allison, you may still get another chance at that. But when we get to that point where we're drawing our last breath, we might sadly find out I don't get a do-over on this, right? Now, in our lesson this morning, we see some bad stuff. Mankind has gone from a single act of disobedience, right? We're in the book of Genesis. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. We fell from grace, from one simple act of disobedience that led to another. And if you remember, we talked last week about sin left unchecked, how it snowballed. So we've gone from disobedience to murder to today in our lesson, the entire population being full of evil and violence in just a few short generations. That's where we are. And there's getting ready to be, in our lesson this morning, there is getting ready to be a reset in this particular case. Now, most people aren't going to like it, but that's what's getting ready to happen. So let's read through this. We got a whole lot of verses to read this morning. As a teacher, you stand up here and you say, oh man, I've only got 7 verses and I got to pull a lesson out of this and put something meaningful together to fill up 45, 50 minutes worth of time. And today I've probably got 20 verses here. So let's read through them. We'll do it the way we always do. I'll read the first verse. You guys read after me. This jumps around a little bit. They keep the same theme through all of this. So we don't get into it. This is very familiar scripture. But we don't get into a lot of the detail about, this is talking about Noah and the ark. We're not going to get into all the detail about building the ark and all that stuff, okay? This is kind of a different viewpoint on that. So I'll read the first verse. You guys read after me. It says, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord.
These are generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God.
And Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence.
And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth.
And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth.
Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch.
And the Lord said unto Noah, come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteousness before me in its generations.
Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by 7s, the male and his female, and of beasts that are not clean by 2, the male and his female.
Of fowls also of the air are 7s, the male and the female, to keep seed alive upon the face of all the earth.
For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth.
And Noah did according to all that the Lord commanded him.
And Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth.
And Noah went in, and his sons, and his wife, and his sons' wives with him, into the ark, because of the waters of the flood.
Of clean beasts, and of beasts that are not clean, and of fowls, and of everything that creepeth upon the earth.
There went into Noah into the ark, the male and the female of God commanded Noah.
And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth.
And God spake unto Noah, saying,
Go forth of the ark, thou, and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee.
Bring forth with thee every living thing that is with thee, of all flesh, both of the fowl and the cattle, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, that they may freely abundant in the earth, and be fruitful, and multiply on the earth.
And Noah went forth, and his sons, and his wife, and his sons' wives with him.
Every beast, every creeping thing, and every fowl, and whatsoever creepeth upon the earth, after their kinds, went forth out of the ark.
Amen. All right. So I'm kind of taking these first 3 verses together that we just read out of chapter 6, 8, 9, and 10. I'm not going to read those together right now. We're talking about this. This is the first we're introduced to Noah. So this talks about, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So let's look at where mankind is right now and what's going on. So God has looked down, and if you go back and you look at the verses just prior to our lesson this morning, you'll see that man has become evil, violent, and corrupt. And it's happened so quickly that it has come to the point, and this is just prior to what we're reading this morning, that God regrets creating man. How terrible is that, that God's crowning glory, should have been, that God, the only creature that God created in his own image, that he breathed his breath of life into, gave a soul to, had turned so bad so quick. It's terrible, right? But God looks at it and, you know what? I wish I hadn't done this. I wish I had not created these. That's that's not the words that the Bible uses, but that's pretty close to God's attitude about creating man. He regretted making mankind at this point because of how quickly we had become these disobedient, corrupt, evil, violent beings. Glad we're not like that today, huh? And God is getting ready to do a reset on a worldwide basis, okay? He's getting ready to start the game over again. I'm using that very loosely, all right? I don't mean to be sacrilegious about saying something like that, but that's kind of what's getting ready to happen here. God's not pleased with what has happened, which should have been, and he designed to be, his greatest creation, right? Mankind. So with the exception of only one man, that's all we see. It's one man stood out among whatever the population was at this time in this short amount of generations from, Adam and Eve to Noah. One man, Noah, that he talks about, and has found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Now, all of us can find grace in the eyes of the Lord, correct? When we put our faith in Jesus Christ, we are under God's grace at that point, right? But here's a man, this is obviously before Jesus Christ. Noah lived his life in such a way that he found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Do you think that God just randomly selected Noah for this project? No, look at some of the characteristics of Noah. It says that he was a just man, perfect in his generations. Now we know he had a few issues a little afterwards, okay? But he was perfect in his generations and he walked with God. What does that mean to you, somebody walked with God? Do you think it just means he believed in God? What would that indicate to you guys?
You obeyed him.
Say it again.
He communed with God.
Okay, somebody else?
Had a relationship.
A relation, it's like he literally, when you talk about walking with God, you talk about the disciples walked with Jesus, right? Their lives, from the time they started following him were dedicated to Jesus Christ, right? They physically walked with God. Now, Noah, and I believe that we could probably take that Noah's life was so in line with God, what God would have man do. It was just the same as having this relationship John talks about, but he literally walked with God. He was a man after God's own heart. Now, we see that also described about David. You know, David had some issues too, but he was a man after God's own heart. Noah was perfect. And, you know, you have to assume that using that word, that's exactly what it means. Noah was sinless at this time. And God did not randomly select him. He selected a person that he knew met certain criteria, right? Here's a guy who walked after the ways of God. He was perfect. He was, what does it say, upright or a just man. He treated others fairly. He was just a good person. Now, whether or not we can ever attain that kind of a description for ourselves, it should be our daily goal, right? As Christians, isn't that what we're supposed to be striving for? Perfection, living under God's grace, living as close to Him as possible, and just trying for perfection. That's something that we should all be doing every day, striving to live a perfect world, or a perfect life, I'm sorry. And then the last thing that we see is this introduction to who Noah is and his family, and we just see that he's the father to 3 sons, and it gives their names, and of course we know that the 3 sons have wives as well. So in this worldwide cataclysmic reset that we're getting ready to see, this man and his family are all going to be spared out of mankind, right? All right, so let's look at verses 11 and 12. It says, the earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. You know, we talked again last week, and I got a little ahead of my notes earlier. We talked last week about how quickly that sin, if we don't check it, will snowball and spiral way beyond where we ever wanted to be, where we ever thought we'd be, doing things we thought we'd never do, and finding ourselves in places that we never thought we'd find ourselves in, right? Here's an example of just how quickly things can go, right? So God looks at the whole world. You know, God's everywhere. God's not, well, I'm going to look at John today, and I'm going to look at Ruby tomorrow, and let's check and see what Luke's doing in a couple hours. God sees what everybody's doing all the time. Okay? He's everywhere. He's all-knowing. He's all-powerful. He's all-seeing, obviously. So he looked upon the world, and he found it corrupt and full of violence. How terrible is that? All flesh had corrupted his way on the earth. So as far as what God had established and set in motion, everybody's thrown all that out the window. Nobody's following God's rules. Nobody's doing as God would have them to do. Everybody is just treating each other horribly. I mean, if you look at somebody's violent, you know, there's a lot of sins that we commit against God. But when you're talking about violence, you know, you're committing that against one another. So everybody's violent. What a terrible place that must have been to live. Now, I'm not saying it's too much different today, and maybe God would look down and think the same thing of us today. I mean, look at this. We're all evil and violent people. But this is what's going on, and God wasn't happy. Or God doesn't, he doesn't like what he sees. Do you ever think about, you know, we see how God looked at it then. Now, I'm assuming that everybody in here keeps up with some news of the world, things that are going on in your community, in the country, in the world at large. It's not a very pretty picture, is it? There's a lot of bad things going on all over the place. And, you know, maybe they always have been, but now we have the means to get the information out there much quicker and much broader, since everybody knows what's going on everywhere. Unless you're living in a thatched hut out in an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, you probably are aware of the things that are going on. So think about this. Thousands and thousands of years after God decided he needed to do a reset on mankind, essentially, what must he think today? Do you think that God could at any time just decide, you know what? Now we know that's not the plan. I'm just going to start all over with this. How shocked do you think the world would be? Pretty much, probably. All right, in the last two verses of this chapter that we're reading, 13 and 14, Genesis 6, he says, "And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood, rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and thou shalt pitch it within and without with pitch." So God comes to Noah. Remember, Noah walks with God. I would assume they have a relationship. God comes to Noah, the only righteous man on earth apparently, and told him that I'm getting ready to start over. I'm getting ready to destroy this. Now, I don't think at the time, it doesn't say here that he told Noah that I'm going to destroy everybody except you. He doesn't call him into the ark until we'll get to that in a minute. But he tells him, I'm getting ready to destroy all this. I want you to build an ark. And he gives him all these very, very detailed instructions about how he's going to do this. But he basically tells Noah, you know what? I see all this corruption, all this violence. I'm getting ready to destroy all flesh upon the face of the earth. Man, everything, all the beasts, everything that crawls and creeps on the face of the earth, all the birds of the air, everything that's flesh, I'm going to destroy it. And it's getting ready to be destroyed. So he gives Noah these instructions on building this ark. Remember, it's never rained on earth yet, right? We haven't had rain before. But he tells Noah to make it the length, the width, the breadth, and how to put it together, and the wood, and the rooms, and all this stuff. It was extremely detailed. I know there's a replica of it, this place in Kentucky. Has anybody ever been to that in Kentucky? Yep. Is it amazing?
It's amazing.
I'm sure that it's pretty outstanding just when you roll up on it and see this, right? So he tells him, and he gives him this, these very detailed instructions on how to make, I've about said instructions again. These instructions on how to make this and how to make it watertight. There's nothing left to chance, okay? God is very, very precise on how to do this, right? Now, our text jumps now to chapter 7, and we're going to see some more details here. I'm going to read the first 3 verses together, 1, 2, and 3 in chapter 7. He says, "And the Lord said unto Noah, Come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by 7s, the male and his female, and of beasts that are not clean, by 2, the male and his female. Of fowls of the air also, of fowls also of the air by 7s, the male and the female, and to keep seed alive upon the face of all the earth." So, God starts to tell Noah now who's not going to be destroyed, okay? He tells Noah that he saw his righteousness, and he and all of his family will come into the ark. You know, and I know I say this all the time, you know, when you read the Old Testament, it is such a study of people, is it not? Of what we should look like, of what we shouldn't look like, but it is really a very detailed study of humans, human nature, the relationship we've had with God, the relationship we should have with God, and the ways that we've just done so many things wrong. But it is just a perfect place to look at a study of mankind, right? The good, the bad, and everything in between. Can you imagine that God looked at you and said, you know what? Because of your righteousness, you and your family are safe. I'm pretty sure my family's in trouble. I mean, I'm just being honest. That I don't walk that close with God, that I think God would look at me and say, Mark, you know what, you and your family I'm going to save. But what a thing to strive for, though, right? For God to look at my life in such a way and say, you know what, I'm going to spare you. And in the world full of violence and full of evil, to be the person or the families that God notices, that's really something to shoot for, is it not? So from a human study point of view, or, that's not a bad thing to say, you know what, I would like for God to look at me and say, you know what, Mark, I've noticed you. You're going to be spared from this, okay? Now, the blood of Christ allows that. But again, this is before Jesus Christ. Noah was already walking in a way that God noticed his righteousness right off the bat. So, but he tells him that he and his family are going to come onto the ark. Now, God's plan also, this great reset that we're getting ready to have, also includes, when we tell this story to our kids, we tell them, animals went in the ark 2 by 2. That's not quite true, is it? 7s. The clean animals, and you remember, there were clean animals and unclean animals. The cloven hoofs, those were all unclean animals. And then there were certain things, and of course the birds and the fowl, they're all clean animals. But there's a differentiation. But God tells Noah to gather up 7 of each of the animals that are clean, considered clean, and 2 of the animals that are unclean. He's going to keep the animals that are unclean as well, but he doesn't want quite as many of them on the boat. All right, so we're going to have 7 of the clean, 2 of the unclean. So, and he tells them to bring up males and females, by the way, because that's the only way to propagate, right? You can't have just a couple of dudes on the boat. You're going to have more kids later on down the road there, or a couple of girls on the boat, and that's going to be enough. You got to have the male and the female. So even all the birds were to be included in pairs of males and females. This is God's plan to bring all this on the boat. Now, we also read here that God's plan, in spite of the impending destruction, was not simply to destroy all flesh, but to start life all over again. This is a restart. This is not just I'm going to wipe it all out, that's it, I'm done. God didn't want to do that. He wanted to restart what he had begun to begin with. So he's going to start with this righteous man and his family, and of the animals, all the pairs, the males and females, and so forth and so on. And he's going to eradicate all that is corrupt, all that is evil, right? That's the goal here, is all of these, everybody else is evil. They're violent, they're corrupt. They're not invited to the boat. Only Noah and his family and all the animals that God created. Okay? Anybody have any comments before I keep going? All right.
So what was his purpose of retaining two evil or corrupt?
The unclean.
Unclean.
Yeah, I don't think that he intended, because I think there are uses for those animals. They just couldn't eat them. So that was the only thing that made them unclean, is, you couldn't eat these animals. But I think there were still uses for these animals that mankind could still use. And God still created them. He didn't want to just obliterate them. But when they were talking about the clean and the unclean animals, what was it okay for man to partake of? And there are certain things that were unclean. And there's religions now that still look at some of these as, we can't eat that, we can't eat pork. So,
But there's
The
scripture
interesting
that
part-
changed that.
I'm sorry?
The interesting part to that is actually they had not eaten meat yet.
Right.
That didn't happen until after they got off the ark. So again, Noah's trusting God here
Yes.
completely.
So, in verse 4, it says, "For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth." So, after completing the ark, it's built, and God telling Noah who and what to bring on board. God then told him that in 7 days the rain is going to cover the earth and would do so for 40 days and 40 nights. When everything's ready to go, there's a very short window of opportunity. Get on board, get ready. This is it, okay? So he tells him in 7 days it's going to start raining. For all of those, think about this. And you know, I don't remember if you guys remember, there used to be, and they were in all the doctor's offices when I was a kid. It was this little Bible story book, and it had the folder in the front. You could get the card and buy this. It's like the Bible encyclopedia or something. And they always had pictures or illustrations. I don't know if y'all remember this. And it showed a picture of the ark, and you know, Noah and all his family are inside of it, and the water's kind of lashing at the sides, and the waves are breaking. And you see all these arms and hands of people reaching up because they want on the ark now. Now they want to change. Don't you imagine that's... You think about the big reset now, or the people that continue to live their lives as if they're in a video game. That's got to be that same kind of desperation when you're taking that last breath. I messed up. I didn't do what I was supposed to do. So here's all these people, the corrupt, the evil, the violent. They're about to find out in a very horrible way that you can't just live any which way you want. You can't. We just can't do it. There's not going to be any do-overs, no resets, no more lives, no more pass and go and collect $200. This is it, right? And they're finding out in the worst horrible way. I can imagine, and I think we see it in Scripture, as Noah was building the boat, the people around him, how did they feel about it? They laughed at him. They scoffed. They thought it was foolish. What are you doing? Come on, have a ball. Look at us. We're all living it up. But on that day, the day that the rain started coming down and the water starts coming up, can you imagine that there was a different mindset at that time? I bet you they all wish there was a reset button right then. I need to go back and do this over. I really messed up. Guess what? There's not one. We don't get that. We don't get to do it. This is it. What we're doing today, what we're doing for the rest of our lives, this is it. All right. I'm going to read the next 4 verses together, 5 through 9. He says, "And Noah did according unto all that the Lord commanded him. And Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. And Noah went in, and his sons, and his wife, and his sons' wives with him, into the ark, because of the waters of the flood, of clean beasts, and of beasts that are not clean, and of fowls, and of everything that creepeth upon the earth. There went in 2 and 2 into Noah into the ark, the male and the female, as God had commanded Noah." Noah, being an obedient man, did exactly as God commanded. I don't see any record where, anywhere through this account, and you know, I'm sure everybody in here has read this story many times, where, you know, God, that's awful long for a boat. We don't even have any rain. We're not on the lake. We don't have any water. I don't think it needs to be that big. I don't think it needs that many rooms. I don't think I need all these animals. And can we please leave the mosquitoes out of this? I'm just joking with that one. But you know what I'm saying? It's God, Noah did exactly as God commanded. Now, don't we find ourselves sometimes, I like to point out our faults, don't I? Maybe I just like to point out my own faults. We'll take God's instruction to a certain point, but I know a little bit better in this regard, or I'm going to do this part of it my way. You know, God, I really don't have to do that, do I? Because I can just do all these other things. But if I leave this, I believe that if Noah had changed any one thing about the way God instructed him to do, the outcome would have been much different than what we see, than what we know to be true, what happened. But Noah, he did it exactly as God told him. That took him a few years to do it, right? What was it, 125 years or so to build the ark? So at the ripe old age of 600, Noah and his family entered the ark along with all of the animals that were being spared. So God told him, It's time to come on the boat. The rain's getting ready to start. Because he had told him in 7 days. So it's time to come on. But Noah did everything just as God had commanded him. Think about what an undertaking this was. Building the boat. So this is just Noah, and I guess maybe his sons helped him some, on the weekends when they weren't working or whatever, and their wives would let them come out. They would, they built this ark just exactly the way God commanded. A huge undertaking. Now, he had God's blueprints to do it. God told him how it was to be put together and all of this stuff. And I could imagine that Noah had never built a boat before. There wouldn't have been any need to, right? And then, after it's built, the gathering of all the animals, as God had commanded, to bring them into the ark. What a huge undertaking. You think about that. Huge. Anybody ever been involved in a big project? Maybe you had your own house built, or you were just involved in some large project, maybe at work or at home or whatever the case is. And you lay out all these plans and you hope it all comes together just right. Maybe there's some mistakes along the way. I know John can relate to this. There's mistakes that happen along the way. It's, oh man, I got to go back and do that. We messed that up. We don't see any mistakes. There was none of that. So this huge undertaking. So the only way that something of this magnitude would have been possible or could have been possible was simply because Noah did everything just as God commanded, right? Any deviation from that would have, I believe, resulted in much different outcome. Now, I'm not saying, God may have still spared Noah in a different way or whatever, but I don't think it would have been the same outcome that we see because Noah followed what God told him to do. Think about your own lives for a minute. What in the world could we accomplish in our lives, in our homes, at work, in everything that we do, just life in general, if we simply just did what God commanded us to do? Noah makes it look easy, right? I mean, here's a guy, he's righteous, he's perfect, he walked with God. But there's no reason why we couldn't have the same kind of success for things in life. Not that we're not going to have things thrown at us, not that we're going to have storms that are come up and things are going to happen. Life is still going to happen along the way. But think about what you could accomplish in your Christian walk, in your daily life, if we simply did what God commanded us to do and stayed away from the things God commands us not to do, right? No reset button, no do-overs. All right. So in verse 10 he says, and it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth. It's D-Day. This is it. It starts to rain. Just as God had said, in 7 days it rained all over the face of the earth. First time it's ever rained. And water covered everything. Right? Everything. All right, so I'm going to go on and read, I'm just going to read the rest of these because I'm about to run out of time. In Genesis 8, 15 through 19. And God spake unto Noah, saying, Go forth of the ark, thou, and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee. Bring forth with thee every living thing that is with thee, of all flesh, both of fowl and of cattle, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful, and multiply upon the earth. Noah went forth, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him, every beast, every creeping thing, and every fowl, and whatsoever creepeth upon the earth, after their kinds, went forth out of the ark. So, except for the coming of Christ, or for us coming to Christ, this is the greatest do-over God has ever given to man, right? The ark finally came to rest, dry land, after all this time of being afloat in the safety of God all the time. You have to think about the ark. The ark's not just a vessel, a boat. This is the safety of God that they were in. Noah, this righteous and perfect man, he is protected by God during all of this. Everybody on board was spared. Everything else outside of that boat, outside of the safety of God, destroyed by floodwaters. And then God makes the call, it's time to leave the boat. Right? They've settled down, they've come to rest on land, and God calls them to come out. And so God commands Noah Take your family and all the animals that found the ark and make more life on earth. Wow, what a second chance, right? What a reboot this is. A reset, whatever you want to call it. In His mercy, God wants Noah's family and the other living things to go out and multiply and replenish and repopulate the earth. So God wanted to do a do-over because He was so disappointed with what mankind had turned out to be. But He wasn't ready to just scrap it all. And so He took this righteous, perfect man, and here's this second chance for mankind. And again, Noah did exactly as God commanded. They went out from the ark and the animals, and they replenished the earth. Noah's family and a select few of these other living things got another chance, a do-over. But untold numbers, and we don't know what the population of the earth was then. We're not told how many people perished. But we know that Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their 3 wives did not. Okay, that's it. That's all we know of it. We don't know about all the ones that died. And I'm sure that those evil, corrupt, violent people probably just kept right on living the way they were living right up until the end. And I would venture to say, just like so many other people do that live their lives however they want today, and they're at that end, and you know, this is my end. What did I do wrong? Where did I mess up? What happened? That's the big one. What happened? How did I get here? No clue. But you know what? By then it's too late. When you get to that point, it's too late. You know, not one of us might ever be perfect, but we can be safe in God's grace, living as close to Him as we possibly can. We can do that every single day, and we should be trying to do that every single day. Noah and his family found mercy on earth, right? Ours lies in heaven. When we draw our last breaths, if we have lived as close to God as we can, you know, our reset, I won't call it a do-over, we're going to be in heaven. That's not the end of it for us. That's not, we're going to have eternity in heaven with Him. But we have to sort of strive to live as perfect and as close to God as we possibly can. We can't keep living like we can start this all over again at any time, because that's not what's going to happen. But daily we should be seeking His grace and His mercy. All right, I'm done. Appreciate it, everybody.